He had worked a long day, the kind of day that makes a man just want to go home and sit quietly for a while. The single father drove slowly along the empty road, the hum of the engine and the occasional passing car, the only sounds keeping him company. His mind wandered to his child, who was probably waiting for him at home with a little homework unfinished and a story to tell. It had been a regular evening until something strange caught his eye. A flicker of movement at the side of the road dot. At first he thought it was just a shadow, maybe a stray animal. But as he got closer, he saw a woman running barefoot along the edge of the road. Her gown, white and once elegant, was now torn and dirty, clinging to her in awkward folds. She looked like someone who had just been through a storm, though the night was calm and quiet. There was fear in her eyes, a kind of raw panic that made him slam on the brakes instinctively. "Are you okay?" he called out, his voice louder than he expected. The woman didn't answer at first. She kept running, but her steps slowed, almost as if she was considering whether to trust him. Finally, she hesitated, looking around as though someone or something was following her. That was enough for him. He opened the car door. "Get in." "Quickly," he said, trying not to sound too alarmed, but firm enough to convey that he would not leave her alone. She looked at him, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. For a moment she said nothing, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she caught her breath. Then, without a word, she climbed into the passenger seat. She was trembling, not just from exhaustion, but from fear. Her hands shook as she tried to smooth down her ripped gown, but the fabric refused to cooperate, and her bare feet left smudges of dirt on the floor of the car. The single dad glanced in the rearview mirror, checking for any signs of pursuit. The road behind them was empty, and the only lights were the faint glow of street lamps stretching down the quiet lanes. He was still unsure about what he had gotten himself into. Offering a ride to a stranger late at night was risky, but the look in her eyes, the pure terror she carried with her, left him no choice. No matter what, he couldn't turn her away. "Where do you want to go?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road. She hesitated, biting her lip, clearly thinking about how much to reveal. "Somewhere." "Safe," she whispered finally. "Please, just drive." Her voice was low, shaking, but firm enough to make him understand that this was serious. She wasn't playing, she was running from something dangerous, something she couldn't explain yet. He nodded, taking a slow turn onto a quieter street. "We'll find somewhere safe. Don't worry. I won't ask any questions you're not ready to answer." There was a pause, filled with the soft hum of the car and the occasional squeak of worn tires over the asphalt. He knew that even though she had accepted his help, her trust was fragile, like glass that could shatter with one wrong move. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't even be out here. They'll find me." She swallowed hard, and the words hung in the air. They'll come after me." He didn't ask who they were. Sometimes asking too many questions too soon could make a person shut down completely. Instead, he just nodded and said, "And we'll make sure that doesn't happen." Her gaze met his briefly, a mix of relief and caution. There was something about his calm, steady tone that seemed to reassure her, even if just a little. The city lights faded as he drove onto less traveled roads, winding past empty fields and quiet neighborhoods. The night was still, a kind of stillness that made every small sound feel magnified. He could hear the woman's shallow breaths beside him, the soft rustle of fabric, and the distant howl of a dog somewhere far away. His own thoughts wandered. Who was she? What had happened to her? And most importantly, how could a single dad like him possibly protect someone in this kind of danger? She didn't offer any answers, and that was fine. Sometimes, people weren't ready to reveal everything right away. Silence was easier to bear then questions she wasn't prepared for. He focused on the road, thinking about his home, his child, and the unexpected turn his night had taken. Life had a way of throwing the most unusual things at ordinary people, and tonight he was living proof of that. A sudden noise outside made both of them tense. It sounded like a vehicle approaching fast from behind. The woman flinched, and he could feel her hands tighten into fists. "They're coming," she whispered. He glanced in the rearview mirror again. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, headlights appeared in the distance. A pair of black SUVs, moving quickly but cautiously, were making their way down the road behind them. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Whoever was chasing her was not just persistent, they were organized, serious, and likely very dangerous. "Don't worry," he said, trying to sound calm even though his heart was racing. "We'll lose them." He made a few careful turns onto side roads, streets that twisted and curved through older parts of town. His mind worked quickly, calculating exits and shortcuts, trying to think like someone who wanted to vanish from view. She remained quiet, watching the passing trees and shadows. Occasionally, she would glance over her shoulder, fear evident in every line of her face. The torn gown clung to her in ways that revealed both vulnerability and exhaustion. He could tell she had run a long way, that she had endured more than one person should ever have to endure in a single night. Eventually, he took a sharp turn into a small, secluded parking lot behind an old gas station. He killed the headlights and let the car coast to a stop. For a few moments, there was only darkness and the sound of his own breathing. "Are we safe here?" she asked softly, almost afraid to hear the answer. "For now," he said. "We'll figure out the next step. No one will find us here for a little while." He looked at her, really looked, and noticed the dirt under her fingernails, the bruises forming along her arms, the small cuts on her ankles. This was a woman who had fought her way out of something terrible. And somehow, she had ended up in his car, depending on him, a stranger. She let out a shaky breath and leaned back in the seat, closing her eyes for a moment. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried weight. Not just gratitude, but a quiet acknowledgement of the risk he had taken for her. He nodded, unsure of what else to say. Words felt insufficient, unnecessary. Sometimes actions spoke louder. Tonight, he had acted. He had stopped his life, his routine, to protect someone else. That, he thought, was enough for now. Minutes passed. The night remained quiet, though the tension lingered like a shadow over them. He kept the engine running, just enough to be ready to move if needed. The woman sat quietly beside him, occasionally brushing the dirt from her gown, her hands trembling less now, but still aware that danger could arrive at any moment. Finally, she spoke again, her voice hesitant. I can't tell you everything." "Not yet, but if they find me—" Her words trailed off, heavy with unspoken fear. "You don't have to tell me everything," he replied firmly. "Just know I'm not going to let them get to you. You're safe with me tonight." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. She wasn't completely safe yet, not by a long shot, but for these few hours, she had someone on her side. Someone ordinary, someone real, someone who had no power or money to throw at problems, just human decency and courage. He realized, in that quiet moment, how strange life could be. One night, one choice, and suddenly you were part of a story you never expected to be in. A story that could change both your life and someone else's forever. And as the night stretched on, the single father sat behind the wheel, the woman beside him, and thought about the unpredictability of kindness. He didn't know who she was, where she had come from, or what would happen next. But he knew one thing. He couldn't turn away. Not now. Not ever. And in that moment, as the road stretched silently ahead and the world seemed to hold its breath, the ordinary man became a quiet protector, a witness to a life that had been turned upside down. The night was far from over, and danger was still close, but for now, there was a small measure of safety, and sometimes that was enough to keep going. The single father drove slowly along the quiet streets, his mind racing as he tried to decide where to take her. Every turn felt like it could lead to safety or danger. He knew he couldn't keep driving forever, but he also couldn't let her walk into the night again. Her fear was real, and he could feel it in the tight grip of her hands on the torn fabric of her gown. She started, hesitating, then sighed. I shouldn't even be out here. I wasn't supposed to leave. Her voice was soft, almost like she was talking to herself. He glanced at her, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. You don't have to explain everything, he said gently. Not yet. Just tell me what I need to know to keep you safe. She looked down at her lap, fingers clutching the ripped fabric. I was supposed to get married today, but I didn't. I ran. Her words were quiet, almost ashamed, but there was an urgency in them too. It wasn't right. It wasn't my choice. The single father nodded slowly. Running was the right choice if you weren't safe. We'll figure out what comes next. She looked up at him, surprise and relief mixed in her gaze. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not with understanding, not with patience. Most people in her world would have told her she had to obey, to accept what was arranged, to follow the plan set for her. But he didn't care about power, money, or appearances. He only cared about the person sitting beside him, terrified and exhausted, trusting him enough to climb into his car. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. The man I was supposed to marry, he's not like other people. He controls everything. He doesn't take no for an answer. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. I can't go back. If I do, they'll make me. She didn't finish the sentence, but the fear in her eyes said enough. He kept driving, carefully choosing streets that were less traveled, avoiding any sign of headlights or surveillance. Then you won't go back. We'll keep you safe. She nodded, but her eyes remained wary. You don't understand. It's not just one person. He has people everywhere. He'll find me. He glanced at her again, trying to measure the danger she described. It sounded impossible, like something out of a movie. But the fear in her voice was real, and the scratches and dirt on her skin proved she had fought to escape. We'll figure it out, he said again. We'll make sure they don't. For a long while, silence filled the car. The night seemed heavier now, the quiet streets more ominous. She kept glancing over her shoulder, imagining shadows where there might be none, listening for sounds that might signal someone coming after her. Finally, she spoke again, her voice hesitant. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. He shrugged slightly, not taking his eyes off the road. Because I know what it's like to feel helpless. I know what it's like to worry about someone you care about. Right now, you need help, and I can help. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes softened slightly, a flicker of gratitude breaking through her fear. Most people wouldn't stop, she whispered. Most people would just drive past. Not me, he said simply. I can't just drive past. I can't. The rest of the drive was tense. Every car that passed made her flinch. Every distant sound made her look over her shoulder. He tried to reassure her, keeping his voice calm, telling her everything would be okay. But inside, he knew that wasn't entirely true. The danger wasn't imaginary. Whoever she was running from had the power to track her, and he had no idea what they were capable of. After what felt like hours, they reached a quiet neighborhood, the kind with small houses and locked fences. streets that twisted in ways meant to confuse strangers. He slowed the car to a crawl, scanning for a place to stop. Then he saw it. An old community center, closed for the night, but with a side door he could jimmy open easily. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe for now. He pulled the car into the small parking lot, turned off the engine, and let out a long breath. She stared at the empty building, her fear still visible, but relief mixed in now too. "Will this be okay?" she asked softly. "For now," he said. "We'll stay here until morning. Then we'll figure out the next step." She nodded and slid her hands along the torn fabric of her gown, brushing away the worst of the dirt. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, but for the first time in hours, she seemed a little less tense. She looked at him, and her eyes held something unspoken trust. They settled into the quiet of the community center. He made her sit on a bench while he checked the area outside, listening for any sign of approaching vehicles or footsteps. Nothing came. The night remained calm, though the air between them was filled with tension and unspoken questions. Finally, she spoke almost in a whisper. "I can't tell you my real name. Not yet. And you probably don't want to know. Not with all this danger. I just want to know enough to keep you safe," he said. "That's all." She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could trust him. Then she said, "I'll tell you some things. But you have to promise not to judge me." "I promise," he said simply. She took a deep breath and began to tell him a little of her story. Her family was wealthy beyond measure, and the man she was supposed to marry. He was powerful, controlling, the kind of person who expected obedience above all else. The wedding had been arranged, everything planned down to the smallest detail, but she had refused to go along with it. She had fled, running barefoot and nearly exhausted, hoping to escape the life she never chose. As she spoke, he listened carefully, asking questions only when necessary. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice or opinions. He only listened. He knew that in moments like these, listening was more important than talking. Hours passed. The woman began to relax slightly, the tremble in her hands slowing, the fear in her eyes softening. She leaned back on the bench, her torn gown spread around her, and let herself rest for a moment. He watched her carefully. Even though she was exhausted, he knew the danger wasn't gone. Whoever was looking for her could appear at any moment. But for now, at least, she was safe. And he could be the one to make sure of it. Finally, she looked at him and said, "I don't know why you're helping me. But thank you, really." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "It's the right thing to do. Someone needed help tonight, and it was me. That's all." The night stretched on, quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees outside. They didn't talk much after that. Words felt unnecessary. The silence was filled with understanding, with the quiet knowledge that they were both just people trying to survive a night that had turned into something neither of them expected. As the hours passed, he thought about how fragile life could be, how quickly everything could change. One moment, he was driving home after a long day, thinking only about his child and dinner. The next, he was protecting a stranger, a woman whose life had been turned upside down in ways he could barely imagine. And yet, he felt a strange sense of purpose, a quiet satisfaction in knowing he could do something, even if it was small, to help. Finally, the first light of dawn began to peek over the horizon, casting a soft glow through the dusty windows of the community center. The woman stirred, stretching slightly, her eyes meeting his. She smiled faintly, a small gesture of gratitude and trust. "For now, we've made it through the night," he said softly. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step. You won't be alone in this." She nodded, her eyes bright with hope for the first time in what felt like forever. I think I can trust you," she whispered Dot, and in that moment, the single father realized that sometimes the most ordinary people could do extraordinary things. They could give hope to someone who felt completely lost. They could offer protection to someone who had nowhere else to turn. And they could change a life, even in small, quiet ways, simply by choosing to act with kindness and courage. The night was over, but the story was far from finished. Danger still lingered, and the challenges ahead would be greater than anything they had faced so far. But for now, in the early morning light, they had survived. They had each other, and that was enough to take the next step. The woman sat quietly, watching the sun rise, thinking about how strange life could be. Just hours ago, she had been running barefoot, terrified and alone. Now, she was sitting beside a man who didn't know her, but who had protected her when she had no one else. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, she felt hoped out, and the single father, watching her quietly, knew the same thing. Life could throw the most unexpected situations at ordinary people. But sometimes, ordinary people could do extraordinary things simply by choosing to help, to care, and to be brave when it mattered most. The morning sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the old community center, casting long shadows across the floor. The single father stirred first, stretching his arms and rubbing his eyes. The woman was still asleep, her torn gown wrapped around her like a shield against the night she had just survived. For a moment, he simply watched her, taking in the exhaustion and the small sense of relief that came from having made it through a night of fear. He knew this was only the calm before the storm. Whoever she had run from would not stop. They were powerful, organized, and used to getting what they wanted. And now, the man in the torn gown had chosen to escape, and someone had helped her. That made the single father a part of this story. Whether he liked it or not, Dot, when she finally woke, she looked at him with tired eyes, a small smile on her face. "Did we make it through the night?" she asked softly. "For now," he replied. "But we can't stay here forever. We'll have to figure out the next step soon." She nodded and swung her legs over the edge of the bench, rubbing her sore feet. "I didn't know anyone could be like you," she said. "I mean, just stop and help someone you don't even know." Her voice was quiet, almost amazed. He shrugged. "I guess I just couldn't leave you out there. No one should be in that kind of danger alone." She studied him for a moment, as if measuring his words. "You really don't know what I'm running from, do you?" "I know enough," he said. "And that's all I need to know. You're in danger, and I'm here to help." She nodded slowly. Then she took a deep breath and began to speak, carefully choosing her words. "The man I was supposed to marry. He's not just wealthy. He's extremely powerful. He controls everything around him. Businesses, people, even some parts of the city. If he wants something, he takes it. If someone gets in his way, they disappear from his life. He doesn't tolerate no for an answer." The single father listened, his expression calm, though his mind raced. He had heard of wealthy, controlling people before, but the fear in her voice made it real in a way no news article ever could. "And you refused him?" he asked softly. "I ran," she said. "I refused the wedding. I couldn't be forced into something like that. I can't live like that, pretending to be happy while trapped." Her voice broke slightly, and he saw the tears welling in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed, but he didn't say anything. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly. "You didn't have to face this alone." She gave a small nod, but the relief in her eyes was fleeting. She knew, as he did, that danger was still very close. The man she had escaped from had people everywhere, and the moment word spread that she had vanished, they would start looking harder. He decided to take action. "First, we need to get you somewhere safer." somewhere no one would think to look. She hesitated. I don't even have a place to go. My family? I can't go to them. They would call him. I have nothing. You have me, he said simply. I'll make sure you're safe. Then we can figure out the rest. She looked at him, uncertainty in her eyes, but also a faint trust. I think I can believe that, she whispered. They left the community center, taking the long way out of the neighborhood to avoid being seen. Every street felt dangerous, every passing car a potential threat. The black SUVs from the previous night could still be out there searching. He drove carefully, sticking to quiet back roads, weaving through narrow lanes that weren't on any map dot as they drove. She told him a little more about her life, though not all of it. She spoke of the pressures of wealth, the constant scrutiny, the expectations to marry not for love, but for convenience and power. She had grown up knowing that appearances mattered more than feelings, that decisions were made for her without ever asking what she wanted. And now, for the first time in her life, she had chosen herself. That's brave, he said softly. Most people would never have the courage to do what you did. I didn't feel brave, she admitted. I felt terrified. I still do. But I couldn't let them control me. Hours passed as they drove. They found a small, out-of-the-way motel on the edge of town, a place old enough that no one would think to check there. He paid for a room with cash, careful not to leave a paper trail. Inside, it was simple, with 2 beds, clean sheets, and a door that locked securely. She sank onto one of the beds, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. I can't believe anyone would do something like this, she murmured. It happens more than you think, he said. But you're alive. You're safe for now. And that's what matters. They ate a simple breakfast from the small vending machine in the lobby, talking in quiet tones. She was beginning to relax, though the fear never fully left her. He could see it in the way she flinched at sudden noises, in the way she checked the window blinds repeatedly. She was learning to trust him slowly, one small step at a time. As the day wore on, news reports on the television caught their attention. Headlines flashed across the screen about the disappearance of the billionaire's bride, the media speculating about every possible explanation. She looked at him nervously. They're talking about me, she said quietly. He nodded, understanding the weight of what she had done. Let them talk. That doesn't change anything here. You're safe, and that's what matters. But even as he spoke, he knew the threat was growing. Someone would come looking, and they would be relentless. She needed protection, and he needed a plan. He began thinking about ways to keep her hidden, ways to make sure that anyone searching would find nothing. That evening, as the sun began to set, she finally allowed herself to relax a little. I've never met someone like you, she said softly. You're just a man with a normal life, and yet you've risked everything to help me. He smiled faintly. Sometimes doing the right thing is worth the risk, and helping you is the right thing. They spoke quietly about life, about hope, about ordinary struggles. She shared small stories from her childhood, things she had never told anyone because they seemed trivial compared to the world she had grown up in. And he shared stories about his own life, about his child, about the difficulties and joys of raising someone on your own. In those moments, a bond formed. Not romantic, not forced, but human, a connection built on trust, understanding, and the knowledge that both of them were navigating a dangerous, unpredictable world together. Night fell again, and with it came the familiar tension. He kept the curtains drawn and the lights low, constantly alert. They both knew that sleep was precious but fleeting. Every sound outside, every distant engine made her flinch. And yet she stayed, knowing he would protect her. Finally, she spoke in a whisper. I don't know how I'll ever go back to my old life. I can't. I won't. But I don't even know what comes next. You'll figure it out, he said gently. One step at a time. You've already taken the hardest step choosing yourself. Everything else will follow. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. Not of fear this time, but of relief and gratitude. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone truly cared. Someone was on her side without expecting anything in return. The single father sat quietly, watching her. He thought about how strange life could be, how one ordinary night could turn into something extraordinary. One small act of kindness, one choice to help, had led him into a story far bigger than he had imagined. And yet, he knew he couldn't stop now. She was counting on him, and he would not let her down. The night stretched on, quiet but heavy with unspoken fears. Outside, the world continued, unaware of the danger that lurked just beyond the motel walls. Inside, two people shared a fragile safety, building trust one small moment at a time, preparing silently for whatever would come next. For the first time since she had fled, she allowed herself to believe that survival was possible. And for the first time, he understood that ordinary people could step into extraordinary circumstances and make a difference. The day had ended, but the story was far from over. The threat of the billionaire's reach was real, and every hour that passed brought new challenges. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough to face the next step. And as the motel lights flickered in the darkness, both of them knew that the night had tested them, taught them courage, and begun a bond that neither of them could have predicted. They were ready, or as ready as they could be, for the trials that were still ahead. The night was quiet, but the quiet felt heavy. Every sound seemed louder in the small motel room. The creak of the pipes, the faint hum of traffic outside, the rustle of the torn gown as she shifted in her seat. The single father sat across from her, his hands folded on the small table between them, thinking about the hours ahead. They had survived so far, but the danger was far from over. I don't understand how he could be so cruel, she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. I mean, he has everything. Money, power, respect. And yet he tries to control everything and everyone around him. He nodded slowly, listening carefully. Power can do that to people, he said. It can make them feel like the world owes them obedience. But it doesn't have to define who you are. You don't have to be a part of that. She looked at him, her eyes full of fear and uncertainty. I can't go back. I won't, but he's everywhere. Even people I thought I could trust are working for him. He's relentless. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Then we make sure he can't reach you. We stay ahead. We keep moving. And we don't trust anyone who might lead him to you. She nodded slowly, trying to absorb the advice. I don't even know how to start, she said. I don't have money, contacts. Nothing. I just have myself. And I don't even know if that's enough. You have more than you think, he said quietly. You have courage. You made a choice to escape. That takes more strength than most people will ever have. And you have me. For as long as you need someone to watch your back, I'll be here. Her eyes softened slightly, a mix of gratitude and fear. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone could be on her side without expecting something in return. But the world she came from had taught her caution, and fear was a constant companion. Hours passed as they talked quietly, planning small steps. They discussed safe places she could stay temporarily, ways to avoid being followed, and the simplest ways to blend in and disappear if necessary. He encouraged her to stay calm and think rationally, reminding her that fear, while natural, could cloud judgment. You have to think like someone who wants to survive, he said. Every move matters. Every choice counts. You've already made the hardest choice by leaving. Now we just make sure you stay free. She nodded, taking in every word, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. "I don't know how I ever faced him without help," she said softly. "You don't have to face him," he said. "Not alone. That's why I'm here." They agreed to leave the motel the next day, before anyone could start asking questions. He had scouted a few safe routes, places where she could disappear for a while. The plan was simple but effective. Keep her moving, stay off the radar, and avoid predictable patterns. Night fell again, and the motel felt even quieter than before. They sat together in the small room, sharing a simple meal from a nearby diner. She seemed calmer now, though the tension was never far from her expression. Every car outside, every distant noise, made her glance at the window. "You know," she said quietly, almost to herself, "I've never met anyone like you. You're just ordinary. And yet, you've risked everything to help me." "Why?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone needed help, and because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes ordinary people can do extraordinary things just by choosing to act when it matters most." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "It's strange," she said. "I've been surrounded by people with power my whole life, and they never helped me like this. They only cared about what I could give them." "That's not real power," he said. "Real power is doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Even when it's risky. That's the kind of power that matters." She nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I wish I could live in that world," she whispered. "You can," he said. "One choice at a time." The rest of the night passed slowly. They talked quietly about small things, stories from their past, memories, hopes for the future. She told him about her childhood, about the moments when she had felt free and happy, even if only for a little while. He shared stories of his own life, about the joys and struggles of raising his child alone. Through the conversation, they built a bond. Not romantic, not forced, but human, a connection based on trust, understanding, and the shared experience of navigating a world filled with danger and uncertainty. But even as they found moments of peace, the threat was never far away. The billionaire's reach was long, and his people would not stop looking. The single father knew they had to be vigilant, that every step they took had to be carefully measured. The next morning, they packed their belongings quietly, careful not to leave a trail. They left the motel before anyone could notice their absence, moving silently through the parking lot. She kept her head down, trying to blend in with the ordinary people around them, while he drove cautiously, avoiding main roads and heavily trafficked areas. As they drove, she spoke quietly about her fears. "I can't go back," she said, "but I don't know if I can stay on the run forever. I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder." "You'll get used to it," he said, "and we'll take it one day at a time. You don't have to think about forever right now. Just focus on the next step, the next safe place." They stopped briefly at a small cafe to eat, trying to appear as ordinary as possible. She kept her eyes low, hands folded over her lap, while he ordered quickly and quietly. They ate in silence, listening to the low hum of conversation around them. The world seemed normal, unaware of the danger that lurked just beyond the windows. After leaving the cafe, they continued their journey, careful to avoid any familiar routes. He drove for hours, taking small roads and avoiding highways, checking mirrors constantly for any sign of pursuit. She sat quietly beside him, exhausted but alert, her eyes scanning every passing car, every pedestrian. As night fell again, they found a secluded cabin on the outskirts of a small town. It wasn't much, but it was private and hidden from easy view. The single father helped her inside, making sure the windows and doors were secure. She sank onto a chair, her bare feet aching from the long day. "I can't believe anyone would go to such lengths to control someone," she said quietly, shaking her head. It's terrifying. I know, he said, but you've already shown you're stronger than they expected. You chose yourself, and that counts for more than anything else. She looked at him, her eyes softening. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. You don't have to, he said. Just stay safe. That's enough. They spent the night in the cabin, keeping a low profile. He kept watch near the door while she slept, alert to every sound, every shadow. He didn't know if the billionaire's people were close, or if they had figured out where she was. But he knew one thing. He would not let them take her, not while he could do anything to stop it. The next morning, they made a plan. They would continue moving, staying ahead of anyone who might be searching. She needed to find a place where she could begin to rebuild her life, far from the influence of her past. And he would help her get there. As they packed their things, she spoke quietly. I've never had anyone look at me and see me for who I am, without wanting something from me. You actually care. He smiled faintly. Of course I care. That's what people are supposed to do. Help each other. Protect each other. You're not alone in this, and you won't be. She nodded, a small smile appearing for the first time in days. I hope you're right, she said softly. The single father nodded, knowing that the journey ahead would be difficult. The billionaire's reach was long, and the threat would not disappear easily. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough to face the next challenge. They left the cabin quietly, moving along small roads and avoiding main routes. Every step was measured, every action calculated. The world was unpredictable, and the danger was real, but they had survived so far. And together, they would continue to survive. Through fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion, a bond had formed, not based on money, power, or status, but on human kindness, courage, and trust. And in a world filled with danger, that bond was more powerful than anything money could buy. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of dew and the distant sounds of a waking town. The single father and the woman had spent the night in a small rented cabin tucked away from main roads. For the first time in days, she had slept without constant fear pressing down on her. Though the weight of her past still lingered like a shadow, he watched her quietly as she stirred, brushing her hair from her face. There was still exhaustion in her eyes, but also determination. She had survived so much already, and now, facing the world ahead, she was ready to take the next step. He knew the danger was far from over. The billionaire she had fled from had influence, money, and power, and he would not let go easily. But they had something stronger than that now: trust, courage, and the bond they had formed in the nights spent running, hiding, and planning. Are you ready? He asked gently. She nodded, swallowing hard. I think so. I have to do this. I can't hide forever. I need to take control of my life, even if it's scary. That's the right choice, he said. And I'll be with you every step of the way. They packed their few belongings into the small car and left the cabin, careful to avoid main roads. Every turn, every quiet lane was planned to reduce the risk of being followed. She kept her head down, her eyes scanning the surroundings while he drove cautiously, mindful of the dangers that could appear at any moment. As they drove, she spoke quietly about her plan. I want to speak publicly, she said. I can't just disappear. If I do that, I'll never be free. He'll control the story, and everyone will think I agreed with him. I need people to know the truth. He nodded slowly, understanding the courage it took to make that decision. It's risky, he said, but sometimes telling the truth is the only way to truly be free. I know, she said. I don't know if I can face it alone. You won't be alone, he said. Not now, not ever. We'll face it together. They drove in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The sun rose higher, and with it, a sense of resolve grew in both of them. She was no longer just a frightened woman running from danger. She was someone taking control of her own life. And he, the single father, had become more than a helper. He was her ally, her protector, and a witness to her courage. By late morning, they reached a small, secure location where she could safely contact a journalist she trusted. She had made arrangements for a recorded interview that would tell her story and expose the truth about the billionaire. She was terrified, but she also knew it was the only way to ensure her freedom. "You'll be safe here for now," he said. "I'll wait outside. You need to do this." She looked at him, gratitude and fear in her eyes. I couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. "You don't have to do anything alone," he replied. "You're stronger than you realize. And you're not alone anymore." Inside the small office, she spoke with the journalist, recounting her story in careful, measured words. She told about the wedding she had refused, the pressure and control she had endured, and the decision she had made to run for her own freedom. Every word was spoken with honesty and courage, and the journalist listened intently, nodding, understanding the gravity of her situation. Outside he waited, keeping watch, every nerve alert. He knew that the moment she became public, the billionaire's influence would try to reach them. But for now, they were hidden, and the truth was being told. When she emerged from the office, relief flooded her face. "It's done," she said quietly. "It's out there. People will know." "That's good," he said, smiling faintly. "Now you can start to rebuild your life." "But what about him?" she asked, a flicker of fear returning. "He won't let this go." "He can try," he said. "But truth is stronger than power when people see it. And you're no longer alone." For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. The fear was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. She had chosen freedom, told her story, and taken control of her own life. And through it all, she had someone she could trust. Someone who had risked everything to help her as they left the secure location. She looked out the window at the passing streets, feeling the weight of the past slowly lifting. She still had challenges ahead, but she was no longer a prisoner of her circumstances. She was free to make her own choices. The single father drove carefully, taking them to a quiet neighborhood where she could start anew. She would find work, a place to live, and slowly rebuild her life. And though the road ahead would not be easy, she was ready. Along the way, they talked quietly about small things, the mundane, the ordinary, the simple joys of life. She spoke of things she had never had the chance to experience, because her life had always been controlled by others. He shared stories of his child, of the small victories and challenges of raising someone on his own. In those moments, the fear and tension faded slightly, replaced by connection, understanding, and the beginning of hope. By late afternoon, they reached a modest apartment she had arranged to rent temporarily. It wasn't much, but it was safe, private, and hers. She looked around the small space, a mixture of relief and anticipation in her eyes. "This is it," she said quietly. "It's not perfect, but it's mine." "That's all that matters," he said. "You'll make it your own, and you'll be safe here." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I can't thank you enough," she said, "for everything." "You don't have to," he replied. "Just stay safe and keep living your life. That's enough for me." For a long moment, they sat together in quiet understanding. The journey had been difficult, filled with fear, uncertainty, and danger. But they had made it through. They had faced the challenges together, and now she had the chance to live the life she chose, free from control and fear. Weeks passed, and slowly the world adjusted to the news. People were shocked by the story, by the courage it took to escape such a powerful figure and tell the truth. The billionaire's influence could not erase her bravery, and the public attention forced him to step back. At least temporarily, she began to rebuild her life, finding a job that allowed her independence, making new friends, and slowly learning to trust again. She still remembered the fear, the nights of running, the uncertainty, but those memories no longer controlled her. They were reminders of strength, of courage, and of the choices that had led her to freedom. The single father returned to his own life, to the routines of work and caring for his child. But he remained in her life, a quiet presence of support and friendship. They had shared something extraordinary, something that went beyond fear and danger, a bond built on trust, courage, and the simple act of helping another human being. One evening, months later, their paths crossed again by chance. She smiled at him, a genuine, unguarded smile this time, free from fear and worry. "I wanted to see you," she said softly, "to thank you again for everything." He smiled back. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're safe and free." They sat together quietly, watching the sunset, feeling the weight of the past lift completely. She had survived, she had told the truth, and she had chosen her own life. And he, the ordinary man who had stopped to help a stranger on the side of the road, had witnessed courage, risk, and the extraordinary strength of the human spirit dot in that quiet moment. They both understood something important. Life was unpredictable, filled with danger and challenges, but also with extraordinary moments of connection and kindness. The world could be harsh and controlling, but ordinary people could choose to make a difference, to protect, to care, and to act with courage when it mattered most. The woman had found freedom, the single father had found purpose, and both had discovered the strength that comes from helping another human being when they needed it most. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, they both knew that life, though unpredictable, had given them something far more valuable than wealth, power, or control: hope, trust, and the chance to truly live.